Imagine waking up before dawn, working a grueling 8-hour shift, and then rushing to a second job, only to look at your bank account at the end of the month and realize you still can't even pay basic rent and groceries. It's not a hypothetical situation. Uh, Many people in America every day experience this reality. According to the 2023 documentary series Surviving on a Minimum Wage, produced by Endeavor, this is the daily, exhausting reality for millions of hardworking Americans struggling to survive on current low wages. Hi, my name is Mia Zetmeyer, and today I'm here to discuss the crisis of stagnant compensation in our country. To address this crisis, I stand in affirmation for the following policy proposition. Resolved, the United States federal government should incrementally increase the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour over a 5-year span. Before we can solve a problem, we must clearly understand its boundaries and its root of causes. Therefore, in today's presentation, I will define the key terms of this resolution, establish the severe harms currently hurting the American working class, and explain the inherent flaws in our status quo that prevent this problem from being fixed itself. Let us begin with the second step of analyzing our resolution. Definition. Defining our salient terms. There are three concepts that we must agree upon. First, the federal minimum wage. This is defined as the lowest hourly compensation for labor that federal law, or at least specifically the Federal Labor Standard Act of 1938, requires employers to pay their employees. This is the lowest it goes. Second, the term incrementally. This means a step-by-step process of scheduled increases rather than a single, great, large, and immediate jump in payroll costs. Thirdly, the 5-year span. This refers to the specific, phased-in duration which the federal minimum wage will be raised annually until it reaches the target floor of $15 an hour. According to a 2021 publication by the House Committee on Education and Labor regarding the Raise the Minimum Wage Act, phasing in the wage floor over time allows the economy and small businesses to adjust rather than adjust predictably while still providing crucial relief to workers rather than an immediate, strange, and hard to maintain bump in wage that could lead to unemployment. Having established our definitions, we must turn to the third step of policy analysis, determining the need or harm within the status quo. What exactly is wrong right now? The problem is that the federal minimum wage has remained completely stagnant at $7.25 an hour since 2009. This was the year after I was born. This is the single largest period in history without an increase since the federal minimum wage was signed into law almost a century ago. That's the longest time without an increase. Because of the stagnation, the real purchasing value of minimum wage earnings has severely decreased relative to the modern cost of living. And we see this often with the housing market and with the grocery bills, where Modern polling shows that over 60% of Americans do not find their amount of wage or their earnings enough to keep up with the rising costs of groceries and rent or housing. And with a no increase of minimum wage, this leaves millions of Americans left to fight to stay afloat in this time where everything keeps increasing in cost, except their wages don't increase. Their wages stay that minimum wage. Let's look at the magnitude of this problem. How many people are affected? The numbers are truly staggering. According to a 2019 report by David Cooper, published by the Economic Policy Institute, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would lift pay for nearly 40 million workers in America. That represents almost a third of all workers in the nation. This research, Cooper's research, explicitly refutes the misconception that minimum wage jobs or earners are just teenagers or low deserved or low demand jobs or summer jobs. In fact, 60% of all full-time adult workers, many of whom are the primary breadwinners for their families, or 60% of minimum wage earners are full-time adult workers who are the breadwinners for their families. Now let's examine just the severity of this harm. What happens to a society when a third of its workforce can't afford to live properly, or at least struggles to live properly? Well, the economic impact is devastating. Of course, the economic impact is devastating, but the human cost, that's even worse. An increase to $15 an hour would lift approximately 1.3 million Americans entirely out of poverty. That includes over 300,000 children. Furthermore, the harm extends far beyond economic and public health. The harm extends far beyond economics and reaches into public health. According to a 2016 peer-reviewed essay and study by Paul Lea in the PMC Journal, low wage levels are directly correlated to adverse health outcomes. Leah's research found that raising the wage to $15 an hour would significantly reduce premature mortality rates and drastically improve the psychological well-being of the working class. Currently, the status quo is literally costing people lives, their health, and mental health. This brings us to the fourth and final step of today's analysis, the cause of the problem, also known as inherency. If the $7.25 minimum wage doesn't work and is so harmful, why hasn't the current system fixed it yet? Or who or what is to blame? The root cause of this problem is deeply structural. Historically, the problem was caused by deliberate neoconservative movement that successfully lobbied to cease indexing the federal minimum wage to inflation or worker productivity, and instead made it an act of Congress to change the minimum wage. This tangibility and change of how wage growth was maintained has made it no longer tied to economic realities, but rather on political endeavors. And in the current climate and current state of the United States, where the two parties are almost exactly 50-50 at all times and are deadlocked endlessly, it is almost impossible for a political endeavor to keep up with the economic realities of stagflation. And that leads to the current inherency. Massive legislative deadlock between our two major political parties. The status quo is paralyzed. According to a 2019 report by the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress, much of the political opposition keeping the deadlock in place is based on outdated data, ignoring recent research, which shows the states with higher minimum wages experience stronger wage growth at the bottom without adverse employment effects. Because the federal government is deadlocked, the current system is failing. According to the 2026 data compiled by GovDocs, 17 states and the District of Columbia have taken the matters into their own hands to reach a $15 minimum wage. But relying by state action is a systemic failure of the United States government. It means that an American worker's ability to afford food and shelter is determined by their zip code, by where they live, by where they happen to be born. That status quo is inherently incapable of fixing this nationwide poverty crisis because the federal legislative mechanism designed to protect workers has been frozen since 2009. In conclusion, words matter and numbers matter. We have defined our terms to ensure a practical, phased-in approach to a $15 minimum wage. We have analyzed the massive magnitude and severe, life-threatening reality of a $7.25 minimum wage floor that has lost its value. And finally, we have identified the root cause, a broken, deadlocked federal system that stripped away automatic inflation adjustments, leaving millions of adult breadwinners and families trapped in poverty. The problem is significant, and the status quo will not and cannot fix itself. Thank you for your time.